Before we kick off with formal proceedings, there are a few parties that we want to thank. First of all, of course, our partners, so our host Telstra, Neil especially, who's been a great supporter of this initiative for many years now. So thank you, Telstra and the team. And our other partners who are here today, S&P Global, got their presence as well. So we've been partners for quite a few years now. So thank you for your support. And then, of course, also our newer partners, Enable, who's also, we've had a great start to our partnership as well. So thank you, Enable. I'd also like to thank our internal organising team. So Alan and Patrice Day, who are here to, he's been great support for us for the event. Thanks, Alan. I think we'll hear from Alan in a minute. Patrice, if you can give us a bit of a wave so we know who you are. Thank you, Patrice. And then, of course, our marketing team, who's been fantastic in putting all this together. I know they're on the live stream. So Jennifer Hall, Mark and Yeri, so thank you for all your help. And then also, of course, our local APAC team, Taneeth, give us a wave as well. So thanks, Taneeth. And of course, Carla and Jessa, who's been great for us. And then finally, I'd just like to thank you for being here. We know that it's always not easy, when you're busy with your busy schedules to be here and spend the morning with us. So we're really grateful that you're here to spend the whole morning with us. And hopefully you'll pick up some great insights moving forward and, from today. And just before we kick off with, with our speeches, I'd just like to get a feel of the room. Can you put your hand up if you've been to one of our events before? Excellent. So we've got a few new faces as well. Fantastic. And can you put your hand up if you've actually, if you've submitted to our survey, you've participated in our research survey this year or in past years? Excellent. Pretty good feel as well. And then lastly, can you put your hand up if you're super excited about our research insights this year? The guys with their hands down, are you just here for the snacks or? Anyway, thank you. No, so that's great. So it's great to hear that, we've had, people who's been supporting us over the years. So yeah, again, thank you for your many years of support. Of course, this year's theme is about extended enterprise. So that stemmed from, the world that we're in today. And really it's about treating an organization, supply chain as an extension of the main business rather than a separate entity. So this is the theme of our research. And this is very much the theme of our presentations today. And this is due to a few different factors happening around the world at the moment. There's been increasing legislation around the world. So in Europe, we're seeing those laws coming down, and also locally, especially in the banking sector and in the critical infrastructure sector. So we're seeing legislation pressure and compliance being a bit of an issue that we need to address. Supply chain disruptions during COVID, that's probably another one that's driving organizations to increasingly see their suppliers as an extension of their enterprise. Increased focus on ESG, of course. We've all seen, we've got the modern slavery legislation that came in November 2018, and that's being refined. And we're seeing around the world as well, all these environmental factors and all these laws that are coming down that we need to comply with. And of course, community and consumer expectations. I think the consumers, community, they're increasingly expecting us to know more about our supply chain, and we can no longer turn a blind eye on what's the social and different sorts of impacts they are having on our globe. With that, I'd like to bring on stage our first speaker, Nika Walters. Nika is a skilled and adaptable global leader with extensive experience in navigating complex transformational environments. She's currently a Telstra Enterprise Executive, and she brings over a decade of experience at Telstra, where she's played an instrumental role in various strategic and executive positions. If I can get you to join me in welcoming Nika on stage. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Frank. So I'll hand over that to Neil. So thank you so much, and what a great opportunity to be able to talk to you guys and actually present you some of the insights of my role, but then also the Telstra broadly as well. So my role in enterprise is I'm an executive of enterprise, and I look after Enterprise Purchasing and Vendor Management Team. Quite a mouthful, short EPVM. So we love abbreviations and the acronyms at Telstra. So normally there's 3 letters, so this one is 4, but bear with me. A very quick overview of my career. So I'm ex-consultant, joined Telstra 11 years ago, and I joined Telstra in our GBS, which is a shared services environment. So I was exposed to many operational groups, and I had a privilege leading those groups, and also do a lot of the offshoring and outsourcing components as well, dealing with our third parties, setting up those models and putting them in place. So after 9 years of doing that, which was great fun and gave me a lot of insights into the procurement organisation and working alongside with the procurement organisation, I've come to a realisation that I wouldn't mind actually switching the pace and turning to more up to our frontline. And frontline is being our customers and our strategic suppliers as well. Then there was a fantastic opportunity came up in the Telstra Enterprise. I didn't quite realise that a couple of years ago, what this actually meant. And the role that I signed up for is not exactly what I signed up for. But now I'm realising, talking today, that my team is very much part of the extended enterprise. And this is the space that exactly where we belong, and that's the role that we're playing across broader organisation. So in the spirit of the extended enterprise, there's a lot of enterprise words in this speech today. Let me walk you through and set a bit of a context around the T25 strategy, which is a Telstra strategy. I'll talk to you about what extended enterprise actually mean for Telstra, and also why extended enterprise is important and the challenges we face today. It's not always perfect, so we do have quite significant amount of challenges that we're trying to overcome. But hopefully I can provide you some of the insights. An important role that we play in bringing that extended enterprise together. So to set a bit of a context on the next slide about Telstra. So Telstra is quite a big beast. Our T25 strategy is a 3-year strategy. What you see on the screen, there is our values that we live by and our people to live by every day. So we've got 6 strategic pillars there as well. Each business unit contributes to all those pillars as well. And quite a significant pillar in there that you'll see talks about growth ambition and the cost ambition. And that's something that I'll expand a bit more on today. In the next slide, I'll set a bit of a scene of our supplier landscape and what sort of environment we're operating in. And the next slide, thank you. So we've got quite a complex landscape. We've got about over 5,000 suppliers that we deal with. That results in a 17 billion of our DVC cost, which is our spend per annum. Telstra made up of several function units, which just adds to the complexity of our environment. Those functional units have their own priorities, have their own missions, and quite often they are competing priorities across the organisation. We've got to make matters even more fun, we've got a lot of mergers and acquisitions, and specifically in enterprise space, and that's where I'm residing. In the enterprise space, those mergers and acquisitions come with their own complexities in terms of people, processes, systems that need to be integrated as part of our broader Telstra ecosystem and then be part of that extended enterprise as well. We operate agile at scale, which can be amazing if you know how to work the system and if you know how to access resources, but also could be a bit of a nuisance as well. And we're still getting some things wrong in that space as well. And obviously we are a publicly listed company where we do have obligations and the duties as well. So let's talk about what does extended enterprise mean at Telstra. Given the landscape that I've just painted and the complexities in defining that landscape and what extended enterprise could mean, I will keep it to 3 entities. We'll talk about our suppliers, we'll talk about our functional units, and we'll focus specifically on the sales and procurement organisation, and we'll talk about our customers. So in terms of our suppliers, firstly, we operate in a highly complicated environment, in a multidisciplinary environment. From everything from 5G networks to submarine subsea cables to the devices, professional services, IT, you name it, we've got it. We have category plans with a supplier tiering. So we've got our critical suppliers, we've got our strategic suppliers, and we have our tactical and operational suppliers as well. We also have supplier relationships that are multidimensional, which is buy from, sell to, sell with, which what this means is today we could be buying from, entering a relationship with a supplier, which is a buy from. But tomorrow we could be competing with that same supplier in a sell to environment, which obviously does add that complexity. But what this really means, it's really important for us to foster those right relationships with the suppliers at the right level, but also have that flexibility, and so we can pivot and change in response to our customer needs. The second dimension is Telstra functions. Like many large organizations, it can get quite complicated. So, but extended enterprise is not just about suppliers. We all play a huge part in it as well, as part of those functions. And they all have their own priorities in terms of the missions and in terms of the purpose as well. My team resides in the enterprise, like you heard, and we are tasked to drive that growth. We are tasked to drive the savings ambitions as well as connecting all of us together, which is our internal stakeholders and external stakeholders. In the enterprise, we have a highly skilled sales force. They focus on customer problems and solving those customer problems with the business solutions. The challenge, and to support growth, we also have a strong alignment with the procurement. And that needs to happen between the sales and the procurement. The challenge is that those two functions have very different sides of that same coin. If we take sales as an example, sales are motivated to sell, equals commissions. Operate in a demanding customer environment. So when they get out there talking to the customers and they understand the customer needs and what they want, the customer quite often turns around and says, I would like that, and I would like that now, please. So, which means that they have to move really fast. Internal process can be seen as a blockers in a lot of the cases to have those the customers on a winning streak. Procurement, on the other hand, they operate in a structured and methodical manner. So we do have a very strong procurement team in Telstra, but quite often they're not enabled with information to be able to drive those discussions, to be able to look at our cost base, to be able to have the strategic conversations with suppliers, purely because they don't have enough information coming back from the business to enable to do that. So what they act as a commercial advisors to the business, and they're interested in value extraction. So naturally, they ensure that the risks are understood when we enter in with those agreements with suppliers, and they appropriately mitigate it as well. And they are primarily focused on the savings rather than sales. So straight away, we've got a bit of a disconnect there. So that's why it's so important for us to bridge that gap between the sales and the procurement to make sure that we still can have the winning deals, we still can drive that growth, but we're not compromising our cost models and taking on unacceptable risks. The third dimension to this extended enterprise is our customers, and possibly the most important part, because let's be realistic, if there is no customers, there is no business. So this means that our customers are treated in the same way as the suppliers, as internal function units, and they are extended part of our enterprise as well. So that is why it's super important for us to get that vertical alignment between our suppliers and the commercial agreements, and also our customers and their needs, which reflect in the commercial agreements. And on the practical level, that results in your back-to-back agreements. So we all know that we've got that common goal that we're all driving for. So on this slide here, let's talk a little bit about my team and why the extended enterprise is important and the challenges that we face today. So as I've said before, we are a reasonably new team. So 2 years in making, the role did not exist before. And the reason why the team was created is to actually bridge that gap between the procurement, between the various functions at Telstra internally, where we've got the competing priorities, for example, even those products as well, and the products that they're building, the sales communities and what they're selling, how we're going out to market, to our suppliers. You can see how all of this adds to that ecosystem that we need to be able to maneuver left or right or up and down as well. So my team plays a very critical role in bridging that gap across the organisation and actively involved in driving the savings, growth, and a business transformation as well, because processes quite often can be challenging and the technology is not easily accessible by the teams to be able to collectively have access to the same information at the same time, so we can all be united by that same vision. So collaboration is key. We need to collaborate. And again, that's a space that my team steps in. As an example, we work on the sales side. We work very closely with our sales community. So we understand the pipeline, which is always a challenge of trying to extract, when is the deal going to land and, when is the customer going to sign on the dotted line so we can engage the supplier and have those agreements in place. So we participate in all of their BAU practices, we attend the meetings, we understand the pipeline. We also understand the strategic priorities for us. Can be a bit tricky sometimes, trying to extract that information can be challenging, which products we want to focus on, what growth opportunities are we driving. So all of that is really, really important information for our procurement folks to enable them to be on the front foot, to enable them to have that opportunity of actually lining up those suppliers, kick off some of those commercial conversations as well. So that's where my team comes in to actually bridging that gap and creating the collaboration. Technology, we spoke about it, it's quite often is a blocker as well. At Telstra, and especially in enterprise, I was just chatting to Alan before, we're a bit behind in terms of our technology and the stack that we operate on. And across Telstra, we're probably the last team that has not yet gone through the massive transformation in terms of digitizing our internal operational processes and the stacks as well. We're focusing on the customer digitization, but we haven't done a lot in that space yet. So again, that was a view as my team is, going through all this pile of stuff and trying to sort of work out, okay, what are our priorities? What do we need? What information do we need access to? So we are heading towards our system transformation journey. We're starting small. We're introducing some of the automations and robotics as an example. We're adding more smarts around how we manage the sales order process, because the more visibility we have of what's coming through the pipeline, the richer and the better our environment will be. So, and that's the same with the processes. We recognise that our salespeople need access to the supply information. So when they're there chatting to the customer comes up with this whole wish list, I'd like this, 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 and that. It can be really difficult for our salespeople to sort of on the fly go, okay, we could offer you this or that, or we engage with third parties. So again, bringing that information and enabling those teams to have a really constructive conversations with our customers are key to us. So we're developing those catalogs, we're adding some smarts so we can actually aggregate that information and have it available to sales team on the tip of their fingers, just like this. Whilst they're chatting, they can have a look-see. So that is really important. So you can see how my team is now playing this vital role. And our targets are cost targets, like many teams at Telstra, but we're also targeted on developing those strategic relationships with our suppliers and bringing our broader groups together. When we get things wrong, it's not great. So, and we get things wrong all the time. So we're trying to get better and we recognise that. But when we do get things wrong, the way that it translates in our landscape is we have no clarity on our strategic direction. It's difficult to extract that information where we're heading, meaning, who do we need to line up in the background to make sure that it's all, moves really quickly. So which could result in a loss of opportunities. So we're just not competitive in the market. It results in loss of commercial opportunities as well. So if we did enter an agreement with a customer, but we haven't lined up the supply yet, and we're entering on a purchase order terms without any contractual obligations, that could be bad. And it also could result in some of the compliance obligations as well. For our customers, this translates into we're slow, the timelines haven't been met, solutions quite often not quite right, price too high, no flow down terms in the back-to-back agreements with the suppliers, which also then could feed that anxiety because they could be overcharged, undercharged as we're scraping together or scrambling together trying to work out what are we paying our suppliers, what we're not paying suppliers, going back to the customers. It's not a great conversation to have. From our suppliers' perspective, is again, we look disorganized. This could result in our suppliers not getting paid because we're trying to work out, do we need to pay them? How much do we need to pay them? Will result in disputes. Quite often it triggers a new cycle of negotiations. I personally enjoy negotiations, but maybe, to wrap it up in a nice way, I don't want to go back and forth because it tarnishes the relationship. So you lose that trust. And this is what you're trying to build with your suppliers. You lose that trust straight away. And it becomes a very transactional discussion rather than strategic because we all got better things to focus on to drive growth. Transactions not going to get you far. But when we do get things right, it's amazing. So we can get on the front foot with our opportunities. We can go out to the market really quickly. We can enable our customers, our sales teams to be able to talk to the customers. We also in the background understand the levers that we have, the levers that we've got to play, our non-negotiables. We're super clear on those. And what we're willing to give to create that balance between the customer needs, our own revenue, it costs, so we're not shying away from that, and our suppliers as well, and what do they want? So what you're trying to create with this, you're trying to create a win-win situation. The mentality of win-lose, it's gone. So you're never going to be successful if your priority is to drive growth. It has to be a win-win situation. In summary, extended enterprise is unique to each company. So we all got our own nuances. You all got your own priorities. You've got to work out what is important to you and what is your strategy. So my team, as I said, we aim to bridge that gap between the functions, all sorts of functions. Today we spoke about the sales and the procurement, and the suppliers, but it extends to much broader ecosystem as well. And we're trying to bridge those gaps to create efficiencies. So the key takeaway messages are prioritize your supplier relationship. You need to understand your suppliers. You need to understand their capabilities. In turn, you need to understand your own strategic direction and where you're heading as a company as well, so you can marry the two together. Invest in your people. Your people are really important. We spoke about technology a bit, but people play a key role in all of this. So people are the ones who can find solutions to really complex problems. They can also build relationships. The systems won't do that for you. The system will make it a bit easier and will make it faster, but people will do all of that. So whilst having the best technology, you need to invest in your people, and they should come first. And the third one is customers. So customers have to be in the center of everything that you do. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have that common goal across all of those variable parts, the functions, the suppliers, and that whole ecosystems, you're not going to be successful. Customers are the ones that unite us all, and you have that common goal because you're all trying to fulfill their needs and requirements. And if you do, we're all going to be successful, and all other things will happen and it will flow. So I'll pause here for any questions.
Thanks, Nika. There was a question that came through online, and just a reminder for people here as well, we do have the facility to ask questions online, and we will pop up the QR code. I think it's in your email as well. But there was a question that popped up online. They were asking about, given the multiple roles that you have to play as an extended enterprise, how do you, you've given us some tips around how to navigate between the different roles, but how do you balance that with building your supply relationships with your suppliers, with those multiple roles that you have to play?
Yeah, it's very tricky. Great question. It can be really, really tricky. The most important bit to build those relationships, and this is something that we're doing now, so I'll give you a bit of an example. We're in the middle of negotiating with one of our largest suppliers. So and we've done over the years, they've been with us for quite some time. So we've done a number of negotiations as well. And we went wrong with some of those negotiations because we couldn't align on that common goal that we had. Our conversations were very transactional as well. So what we're doing differently this time is before we knew when we need to start those negotiations, and before we even enter or even signal to the supplier that we're ready to go, we started to do a lot of homework in our own backyard and actually working out, connecting all of the parts of the business, because as you remember, the relationships can be really tricky. With this particular supplier, we've got a multi-dimensional relationship. We can compete with them, we can buy off them, we can sell with them. So it gets really tricky. And then that also different parts of our business at the same time needs to play in this. So what we decided to do is actually get our business organized first, understand our priorities and the drivers behind each business unit that it's actually had engagement as a supplier. And we're driving this negotiation in the holistic manner. What that does to the supplier relationship and building that relationship is they get so much more clarity now. They get clarity on our ambitions. We're very clear on what we would like to head and what we would like to do, which makes those conversations just so much easier. Of course, there is a cost component. So let's not shy away. Which negotiation doesn't have the cost component? But this is not how you start negotiation or even the conversation. So you start the conversation, about the opportunities that you could co-create together, and obviously the cost component that will come at a bit of a later stage. But you are talking about, those growth ambitions, which is in our case, that's what we're doing.
Excellent.
Yeah, start internal first.
Thank you, Nika. If you can join me in thanking Nika for that. Thanks, Nika. It was really great insights. I was absolutely fascinated by all the challenges, and I can imagine it's not easy playing the role that you play with all the intricacies and all the complexities with the different organizations. So thank you, it was great. As we said, there will be opportunities to ask more questions from Nika, and we do have a Q&A and a panel discussion later on today as well, so there'll be opportunities for that. And if you can, just hold on your questions and send them through the app as well. Again, we'll flash the QR code. It is in your email, I think the invite email as well, so you can access that and you can ask those questions as well. Now, what we want to do now is move on to the next part of our program, which is, of course, the launching of the 15th year of the Supply Management Research Insights. So Alan will be taking us through those insights. Just a quick intro. I'm sure most of you know about Alan, but Alan Day is, of course, the global CEO and founder of State of Flux. Alan founded State of Flux in 2004. He's traveled the world providing supply management advice to global organizations, and State of Flux now have offices in Australia, New Zealand, UK, continental Europe, US, and Alan has over 20 years experience and is now a global world leader in supply management. And if you can,
I'm not sure I can live up to that, Frank. But anyway,
if you can please, hold on to your.
And there's the QR code. I don't know why my marketing team put my photo next to it, but that is the QR code for questions anyway. But
Thank you,
good
Alan.
morning, everyone, and thanks so much for coming along today. Hugely appreciated. As per previous years, I also want to say a big thank you for all those who do the survey. Without you guys doing the survey, we wouldn't have any research to present to you. So huge thank you for everyone who took the time. I think I say this every year. We tell you it's 20 minutes to do the survey and we lie. It does take about 30 to 40 minutes. But if we told you it takes 30 to 40 minutes, no one would do it. So we have to say it's 20 minutes. So thank you for taking that 20 minutes to do the survey. It's hugely appreciated. We've covered off quite a bit about why the theme this year is around extended enterprise, but I do want to go into it a bit further on a slide coming up. So we'll do that. But I'm gonna kind of bore you. As Frank said, we've had 15 years of doing this research. It's like running a marathon. The kind of concept comes up at the beginning of the year. We have to come up with the new question sets, and then we harass all of you to do the survey at around about kind of May, June time. And then we crunch the numbers and write the book. So it's a bit of a labor of love. So thank you. But this year's, and a huge thank you to the marketing team, Jen and team. This is this year's book. There are copies available. I'm not sure when we're handing them out, but we don't give them out too early. Otherwise, you just look at the book and wouldn't listen to the speakers. So, but the book does look amazing. And this year we've got 4 case studies, and you're going to hear from Mark from Transurban after me. But we've also got Air Services Australia, Savills, and Discover, which is a US financial services organization. There's also in the book interviews with the former CPO of Thomson Reuters. And I'm not sure I'm allowed to mention the organization, but if you want to send me a WhatsApp or an Instagram, then maybe you'll realize which one we're talking about. So that's in there as well. And then a fantastic interview with the CEO of a US business called Core Logistics, which is like a packaging subcontractor to the big fast-moving consumer goods companies. And amazing story. He started homeless with just him and his son, and has become an amazing entrepreneur. And he talks about both sides of buy and sell. So that's in the book this year. Please enjoy. The other one that I enjoyed is we've interviewed an academic who is an expert on micro stresses. And his expertise is generally around people micro stresses, but we actually work with them looking around how do organizations create micro stress for their suppliers, and what could you do about how you work with your suppliers to remove those micro stresses. So there's at least 7 good articles in there, as well as some kind of thought leadership around the results. So please enjoy. As I said, we'll hand that out in a minute. This year's responses. So again, each year we put up the stats, and it's those people who have got through all, I think it was 73 questions in there, all 40 odd minutes. And in actual fact, we had about 760 start the survey. And these are the people that completed it. So 350 organizations, which makes it the biggest globally around there. What's interesting is you'll see that the numbers from the countries kind of reflect the maturity of procurement. And I've got some stats on APAC, which has had some good growth actually. But what's interesting is, we don't see a huge amount in Africa or Latin America in terms of supply management, purely because their procurement industries aren't quite as developed as some of the Western world. But we are starting to see more and more coming through, which is quite interesting. But you'll also be pleased to see that APAC has improved considerably over the last 12 months. When we do the survey, and this has come really from, well, in February we'll be 20 years old, so 20 years of doing this. When we look at supply management, we look at it and we arrange it in these kind of 6 pillars. And apologies if you've heard me say this before, but I will repeat it. To make supply management work, you need all 6 pillars to work. So you can't just go and work on governance and process and think that the program will work. You need to have a business case and understand the value. And for a lot of organizations, what the hell does supply management actually mean for your organization? Has anyone defined it? Because otherwise you'll get people thinking, oh, it's performance management. Some people will think it's what time is the golf game? When do we take the supplier out to dinner? You get a real random view of what is supplier management, as opposed to a structured focus on, is it contract performance, risk, relationship, and so on. So Starting with that, around that kind of value and value proposition, engaging, and it's amazing still, after doing this research for 15 years, people still forget to engage their suppliers in their supply management program. Scary, isn't it? Or they only engage the top X%, as opposed to coming up with a program that covers all suppliers, but different flavors of your program as you go through it. Again, one of the common mistakes is people jump straight to process without engaging the business up front, or they jump straight to segmentation without engaging the business. So that governance and process, these are in order that you kind of should do them in. I'm going to cover off people in a bit more because there's some interesting stats that came out this year around people. But again, the most common challenge for people is actually, and this is going to sound funny, but getting it out of procurement and into the wider business. Remember, a lot of supply management is done by your stakeholders. So our role really is how do we enable our stakeholders to do it well and do it right, as opposed to doing it for them. But then, have we trained our stakeholders? Do they have it in their job description and so on? Technology, again, we can cover some of this, but really we're looking for kind of things like supplier onboarding, contract performance, risk, relationship, and so on. And again, some interesting stats. And finally, collaboration is a summary of all of those, or an output of all of those. But what we look for is things like 360s, joint account plans, and value release activities. So actually delivering on the value that you came up with right at the beginning. So sorry to labor those, but it's quite important because when you pick up the book, you'll find that the book is organized in these 6 pillars. So I should have done a drum roll. This is this year's results. Couple of interesting stats here, and the red line, by the way, is APAC. So I'm going to cover that off in a minute, but just so that, and hopefully you can all see from the back of the room, but the dark blue line there is the leaders. So that's the average score for the leaders, and this year 8% of organizations were leaders. Now, in order to be a leader, you needed to be in that established band. So the third band up, this one here, you needed to have 4 or more pillars in the established band to reach a leader. So we don't, it's not an arbitrary thing. It's not the top X% become a leader. You actually have to score, as I said, 4 or more of your pillars need to be in that group. To be a fast follower, which is the next 23%, that's the lighter blue color, you have 3 of those pillars in that established group. And then followers are the people learning how to spell SRM. So anyway, no, they're at the beginning of their program. As you'll see, it's nearly 70%, 69% of organizations fit in that follower. So most people are starting their journey. Couple of interesting stats here. You'll notice pretty much, I think, so these are averages of the leaders. I think technology's just squeaks into it, but the overall average of the leaders, we really don't have anything in the advanced. And previous years we did. So actually the quality of what's happening out there, so last year it was 9% of organizations were leaders, this year 8%. So actually people aren't doing it as well, and the quality isn't as good, which is an interesting message. I think it's because the last few years have really stress tested our supply management. You're in trouble, something goes wrong with your supply chain, what do you do? Or what does your CEO do? Picks up the phone to the supplier, help us out. And we've stress tested our supplier relationships quite considerably during COVID, during some of the supply chain events that have happened, during the chip shortage and so on. So I actually think there's more realism in terms of how good people's programs actually are in this year's results. I think previously maybe people have overestimated how good they are. Now with a bit of stress testing is there. The other thing that I would like to point out, and it's the same in APAC, people. Nika talked about the need for training people, developing people, and frankly, even finding people. I was yesterday. I had a call with the global CPO of one of the world's largest entertainment companies, and they have lost 40% of their procurement team over the last 2 or 3 years, with other businesses, other streaming businesses, stealing their people, and replacing them has become a huge challenge. So part of it is finding good people, especially in supply management, and then actually training them is another challenge. So globally, it's our worst pillar, but it certainly is in APAC as well. But we have got some good news around APAC. So actually, we're seeing a 20% increase in overall performance from APAC, which is pretty impressive. And in actual fact, that engagement pillar has gone up 28% from last year. So a huge increase. So people are kind of focusing on it. It's interesting. It's key. It kind of makes sense because being in this corner of the world, our supply chains are critical. We have less suppliers. So really we have to partner with organizations, but there's been some great increase in that. Where we've got a bit of a challenge is governance, and the fact that we're not as structured as we should be. Our segmentation is not as strong as it should be, and often we're not doing things like developing treatment strategies for each of the segments or subsegments. So as a region, we've got work to do there. I'm not sure it's because we don't like process. I think we like process, so it's more around actually we just haven't got to it, and maybe it's probably tied to have we got enough people to do it, or are our horizon in the past, our horizons haven't been as good as what good looks like potentially. I think that's less of a challenge now. But technology has increased, but we're still seeing most of supply management done on those fantastic supply management technologies, Excel and SharePoint. And I don't know about you guys, but I can never read someone else's spreadsheet. It's just a common challenge. So I think as an industry, we need to embrace supply management technology a bit more, especially on some of the basics around contract performance relationship. So that kind of hub there is quite key, but it is moving forward, albeit slowly. And then we've covered the people one a few times, but if you haven't thought about what you're doing in terms of role descriptions, getting it into business stakeholders' job descriptions, or training people, please put it high on your agenda. Right, extended enterprise, and I'm not going to repeat what Frank said in terms of why we were looking at this, in terms of that increasing legislation, market pressures, and so on. I'm going to have more of a procurement discussion, if that's okay. And please, you can call out if you disagree, and I'm happy to have the debate. But I think procurement as an industry, we've got a problem. We are known predominantly by our stakeholders as the RFP guys. You know, The business needs a new supplier. I'll go and talk to procurement and they'll run an RFP. They'll go and do a deal and, you know, it'll be an RFP or a negotiation, you know, which we all love, right? Everyone loves a negotiation. But I think that's a problem because with some of the new AI tools, and I betcha most of your suppliers are responding to RFPs via ChatGPT. Has anyone caught a supplier out yet? I'm waiting for the day when two suppliers' responses are pretty much exactly the same from ChatGPT. So the point I'm trying to make is we, you know, like it or not, and I know we do a lot of other things, but that's kind of our brand, right? But the problem is with these AI tools, RFPs are going to be commodity. They're going to be something that can be run by technology or at least an admin person. And so that only leaves us two ends of the process to own, right? We have to understand the customer needs, to Nika's point about putting the customer at the heart of it. And we have to manage the supplier relationships. So for me, where would I pin brand procurement? I think we need to be owning the extended enterprise. I think that needs to be our new thing that we own. Because if you take the one that I find quite interesting is this, it's the bottom point on here, transition from goods to services procurement. No one buys, I don't know, ball bearings from SKF anymore. They buy a service. You don't buy product. You know, pretty much all organizations now sell services. And so that's challenging us as procurement in terms of what we're doing. And it also means that a lot of our workforce no longer work directly for us. They work for a supplier. And we've got some stats coming up. But if you think about that, you can have, and I'm telling you the answer of one of my slides coming up, but you could have 50% of your workforce not employed by your organization. And who motivates them? Who makes sure that they're aligned to your goals? Who makes sure that they're focused on delighting your customer? Who makes sure that their behaviors are aligned to yours? And I think that's the role procurement needs to play, is owning those suppliers and that whole extended enterprise so that they are part of our team. So, sorry, I'll get off my soapbox. Well, I'm allowed to get on a soapbox a little bit here, but hopefully that kind of gets you thinking about that. So the good thing here is, I'm just going to pull out a couple of stats. The top, from your point of view, left-hand corner, 98% of people recognize that suppliers are key to your extended enterprise. But the one on the right-hand side, this one here, 9%, only 9% of people are seeing or are actually doing that and treating suppliers as part of their extended enterprise. So, and one of the little catchphrases I like, and it's in the book this year, is you're only as good as your worst supplier. Now, if you think of it, you're a team, you're going forward, delighting your customers. If there's a chink in your armor, then that whole customer experience is ruined. So we're only as good as our worst supplier. That number has to go up. And I think in this room, we are the people to make that number go up. So that's my go procurement moment. And there's lots of benefits from it. You know, 80% improved risk mitigation, 71% improved supply chain efficiency, 70% agility, improved agility. So there's definitely benefits in doing it. But the fundamental driver for me is, I think this is what's going to keep procurement alive. Otherwise, potentially we're going to be roboticed out. So some questions. what I kind of answered this, but one of the things that if you can flash your mobiles up and answer a question here, what we're looking for is, I mentioned the 50%, but for your organization, that may well be different. From if you look at your kind of organization and your suppliers and you divide it up into numbers of people, how many of, percentage-wise, is it 50-50, 50 internal people, 50 supplier people? Or for your organization, is it different? Because some organizations, suppliers aren't involved in the front line at all. Others, we did a study for one of the banks in the UK, and we walked through a customer experience. And we looked at, as that customer experience, what was affected by suppliers. And you walk in the door of the bank and you go and see the teller, and the teller's a temp from an agency, so they don't work for the bank. You then get your statement sent out to you, and that's done by a supplier, both the technology and putting it and printing it and it arriving in the mail or email. You get your credit card, that's a third party. You ring up a call center, that's a third party. So interestingly, not much of the customer experience was actually handled by the bank itself. So think about that from your organization. I've got 5 minutes, so quickly think about that for your organization. Hopefully, do we have the stats? Has everyone kind of given us what numbers are we getting?
Yeah, so I'm seeing it live now on my screen. None, 12%. The most, up to 25%. We've got 38% of the crowd saying that up to 25%, and then 25 to 50%, and we've got 29%. So that's probably the average within this room, and I think we're going to compare it with the
it's pretty,
results.
funnily enough, it's very similar to the global numbers, which is not much in terms of none, only 9%. Most people have at least 25 to 50, or this piece here. So huge amount of your customer experience is actually affected by your supplier experience, which is quite scary, right? And I mean, I've got a big thing around, we do a lot internally around what is the customer experience. The other bit that we don't do is what is the supplier experience when we deal with the supplier. So, and again, I did flesh up some benefits. Another quick poll, give you 60 seconds for this one. Benefits. Love to get your kind of ideas on benefits as well. Frank.
Yeah, no one's voted yet, so.
Okay.
Now, so people aren't just checking their WhatsApp messages, saying they're really
Yeah.
interacting.
They're checking WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook. Wouldn't know who that company is. As the votes come through. So I mentioned some around risk mitigation, efficiency, customer choice comes up really high on there as well. And these are the global results. So
the results here are actually quite similar. So we've got top one, improved risk mitigation, 87%. So that's the number one, similar to the global average. Number two in the crowd is improving supply chain efficiency, 72%, almost identical to what we've got up there. What's interesting, I think the ones afterwards, agility, we've only got 44% in the room as opposed to global, which is 70. And then custom of choice, again, probably not as high a priority here with 54%, whereas globally we've got 68.
Interesting. So I mentioned up to 50% of people's workforce is actually not employed by you, it's employed by your supplier, which is an interesting challenge that we have. And for me, this number's only going to grow. So a couple of calls to action. I think it's worthwhile mapping out customer journeys. So here I am telling a room full of procurement people to think about what are your customer journeys, but actually, how do your suppliers affect those customer journeys? It's really good. And I can tell you now that your board will really resonate with this sort of information around of our customer journeys. These are how suppliers impact them. We still think measuring whether you're a customer of choice as part of your SRM program is critical. For me, it's generally the starting point of your SRM program is that customer of choice piece. And then what I would do is take the top two and create your value proposition in your business case. Don't try and do that in a darkened room. Do it on facts and data from the top two. And the other bit that I'm not seeing enough of is what's your change in communication plan for supplier management. Remember, you can't do it yourself. You need the business stakeholders to be brought in, to be part of the change and so on. And you'll hear from Mark Sheldrick in a minute around the good work that Transurban have done around that kind of change and setting that up correctly. I talked earlier about focusing on segmentation and treatment strategies. It's funny, on the survey, for 15 years, everyone tells us they do segmentation, but then they tell us that they only do it on spend and criticality. The good programs use about 15 different criteria, and then they also couple that with treatment strategies for the different segments and subsegments. I've talked about role description, so I won't go on about that. SRM technology I've talked about. The last bit is actually for those top ones running the 360s and joint account plans. So you will get these slides, you will get these action points, but they are definitely things for you to think about from the results. Anyway, I'll look forward to handing out the book and answering questions. I know we've got a separate session, so please hold your questions and we'll answer those when we can. But thank you.
Thank you, Alan. It's certainly great to hear how the latest trends are, and always find really good pockets of gold nuggets. Hearing from your speeches. So as Alan had mentioned, we do have a Q&A session towards the end of our program today as well. So if you can please, again, hold on to your questions. You can either ask them online or you can ask them during that session as well. Thank you, Alan. Next up, we have Mark Sheldrick, who's head of procurement at Transurban. As Alan had mentioned, I think Mark's done really well in terms of implementing supply management across Transurban. We've heard a lot of stories ourselves from Mark about the challenges, and then some of the really good bits that Mark has done as well. Mark has over 20 years of experience spanning both international and Australian industries. He's a seasoned procurement and commercial professional holding a CA background, and he's got expertise across quite a wide range of industries. If you can join me in welcoming Mark to talk about Transurban. Thank you.
Thanks, Frank. All right, great to be here, and thanks to the State of Flux team for giving me the opportunity today to talk about Transurban's supplier relationship management journey so far. I plan to cover a little bit of detail with respect to how we set up the program at Transurban, how we actually approach it now that it has been implemented, and also some of the lessons that have been learnt. But before I take you through that in a bit of detail, I thought it might be worthwhile giving you a little bit of background on Transurban. So we're an Australian-owned company that started about 25 years ago with the opening of CityLink here in Melbourne. We operate and develop toll roads across Melbourne, Brisbane, Sydney, Washington in the US, and also Montreal in Canada. On our roads, there are approximately 2.4 million trips taken every day. And we've actually got 22 roads in operation. We've got 4 new roads that are currently being developed. And whilst our primary focus is building and operating toll roads, we're also a technology company as well. So we're researching and developing new technology that's going to make it easier for people to travel on our roads. And we're investing quite a lot of money and time into that going forwards. We're a top 15 ASX listed company, and we've got a direct workforce of 4,000 people. We outsource nearly everything we do, and thus we are heavily reliant on our suppliers and our partners. We've got 1,600 suppliers in total. We spend about $2 billion with those suppliers, and they help us develop and maintain our assets. These suppliers are really critical to us to develop and maintain those assets, and also they're critical for us to ensure that we're meeting investor expectations and also delivering on our goals. Given that, we need a collaborative value chain, and that's why supplier relationship management is so important to Transurban. So our journey on supplier relationship management started about 12 months ago, and the genesis of that program came from a survey of suppliers back in late 2021, early 22. The survey was part of a major listening program that included interviews with a wide range of government stakeholders, community leaders, suppliers, customers, and also employees. The survey was called Project Listen, and what the exercise did was provide us with some valuable feedback as to understand and address what was most important to our stakeholders. We learned from this survey that we weren't getting the most out of our relationships with our suppliers. Suppliers wanted to hear more from us with respect to our strategy. They wanted to work together in different ways. They wanted to obviously promote their services and goods, but we were keeping them at an arm's length. So from this major listening exercise that we did undertake, we realised that we needed to develop a formal SRM program. And that was really required to ensure that we had a structured, cohesive and standard or systematic approach as to how we engaged with our suppliers. It was required so it could complement our existing contract management framework, and we also wanted to ensure that it would improve and generate mutually beneficial relationships with those suppliers, and obviously deliver commercial and even non-commercial benefits as well. So in consultation with the State of Flux team, we built a program that's centred around a current state assessment, a voice of the supplier survey, undertaking a market scan of technology options out there, reviewing our segmentation, developing a value proposition and a business case, and then lastly, building that execution plan, including a pilot. The business case took about 8 months to develop. We spent 3 months on actually developing the SRM framework itself, selecting those strategic suppliers, establishing a SRM Centre of Excellence, and also the comms planning, which is extremely critical, as Alan just highlighted. In July and August, we selected 2 suppliers to test the suitability of the SRM framework and also to implement the technology that we had selected as well. So we're now in phase 2, full implementation, and we're rolling the program out to 15 strategic suppliers. Just taking a step back though, the current status of state assessment and the voice of supplier survey that we conducted form part of a business case that told us some quite telling information. We did have pockets of excellence within the organisation with respect to managing supplier relationships. Our engagements, however, were quite siloed. So we had business units often engaging with the same suppliers at different points in time throughout the course of the year. We had engagements which were driven by individuals in varying different formats, and they were actually covering areas that weren't necessarily critical to Transurban nor even the suppliers. The conversations that were happening with suppliers were also operational and performance-based, certainly not strategic. And worryingly, our suppliers were telling us that we weren't providing them with any incentives for sharing new ideas. We weren't giving them any clarity with respect to our plans, and we were certainly keeping them at an arm's length. Internally, we knew that we had a solid structured process around at the contract level, but we had nothing formal at that supplier level, and we certainly weren't providing our suppliers or our internal teams with any guidance or support once those suppliers were onboarded. We had tech systems in place, but they were more at the compliance level as opposed to that value creation level from a supplier and relationship management perspective. So concurrently with the current state assessment and the Voice of Supplier survey, we did assess the market for tech solutions. Some of the considerations that did come into play were bringing on a tech solution that was able to integrate with our existing ERP system. We had to ensure that it was best practice data security. The system needed to be intuitive, user-friendly. We required insightful reporting out of it as well. We wanted it to be customizable, modular, and flexible in nature. And last of all, it had to also be cost-effective for us. So in order to convince internal stakeholders and also suppliers, we needed a value proposition. And that's where we teamed up with the State of Flux team. And through their research, they told us that if we're able to address the problems that came out of that Voice of Supplier survey and the current state assessment, we could deliver and generate a number of benefits from this program. Those being extracting potential cost savings in the vicinity of 3 to 6%, increasing the likelihood of preferential access to goods and services, increasing performance, reducing our supply chain risk, and also potentially enabling growth as well. Also, with the State of Flux team, we conducted internal workshops, and that really drew out areas of opportunity with our suppliers that SRM may be of benefit. So the areas that we extracted out of those workshops were managing risk, strategic alignment with our stakeholders, extracting mutual value, addressing sustainability and ESG concerns, and also enhancing the stakeholder experience. So post this, we spent quite a bit of time promoting the concept internally. We did have to persuade internal stakeholders that the program would benefit them and our suppliers. We had to allay fears with respect to duplication of effort with our already existing contract management framework. We also had to allay fears that the program was another layer of procurement bureaucracy. We also had to make sure that we were aligning roles and responsibilities. There was a fear from some stakeholders that procurement were going to control and own the relationship as opposed to the business. And lastly, we had to secure funding as well. So that being for the tech solution and also dedicated resources. And although it did take quite a bit of time and effort with some stakeholders, we were able to present quite a compelling business case and get it approved for launch. So how does it look now that we have it up and running? So we've anchored our program on 4 phases within a supplier relationship management lifecycle, those being supplier segmentation, identifying those value drivers, the people and engagement process, and also the actual operating cadence. And similar to a lot of SRM programs out there, we have segmented our suppliers into tiers. So this being important because that helps us enables us to manage our resources. It also helps us to better direct our risk management activities and also our cost optimization efforts. So tier 1, unsurprisingly, is contained of our high value, high critical suppliers. Alan did touch on the fact that there should be a scenario where you're looking at potentially 15 different areas for segmentation, but we've started with 2 or 3 for the time being. We have 15 suppliers in this particular tier at the moment, and they do require more enterprise-wide oversight and management. We've also landed on the program for these level 1 suppliers being managed by a procurement SRM Centre of Excellence. What we do have in Tier 2 are also, high value and highly important suppliers. These are business-led in terms of managing those relationships. However, the Procurement Centre of Excellence is able to provide those guidance, the tools, the frameworks for the business to manage those relationships. Tier 3 is comprised of commodity-type suppliers. They require minimal formal governance, and similar to Tier 2 suppliers, we've got them as being business-led from a relationship governance perspective. So for phase 2 of our SRM lifecycle, we identify drivers that are going to provide or deliver the most amount of value, both for the supplier and also for Transurban. What we've got here is the foundation for potential agenda items when we do have our SRM governance sessions. These areas do cover risk, sustainability, innovation, cost management, and also strategy as well. And anchoring on these 5 or so value drivers ensures that we have a consistent and standard approach to managing the relationships across the organisation. Phase 3 is all about identifying who will be involved with the program. And as mentioned, for our Tier 1, the Procurement Centre of SRM Centre of Excellence take care of that. The role of the Centre of Excellence there is to organise and chair the strategic governance sessions, to provide to manage the framework, to have carriage of the tools, the techniques and the approach. And they're also there to identify SRM process improvements as well. On the side, the team also provide market intelligence and also supplier insights as well. For Tier 1, each of those suppliers has an executive owner of the relationship, and the SRM Centre of Excellence also has responsibility for working with business teams to drive initiatives that fall out of those formal governance sessions as well. We've been very deliberate in making sure that there's a clear delineation between the SRM program and also broader contract management, and they're in the responsibilities of those respective areas. So in the case of contract governance and monthly performance management and the like, that being the responsibility of business-led teams. Phase 4 is our operating model or cadence, where we've started with at the moment biannual governance sessions with those top 15 suppliers, and that's supported by our quarterly governance reviews and also monthly operational reviews at that sort of basic performance and commercial level as well. We've anchored on some quasi-standard agenda items just to give you a bit of insight there in terms of what they do cover there, but we do ensure that a plan and the strategic value drivers are tailored for each specific supplier that we do have in Tier 1 in particular. So, what are some of the lessons that we have learned? Discovery, it's imperative from our perspective, at least anyway, that you do spend and invest enough time up front into undertaking a current state assessment. It's getting supply feedback is absolutely critical, and also mapping out your internal stakeholders is very important as well. We missed a few early days and we had to go back again and probably lost a little bit of time, but it's important to map that out up front very clearly. Engagements, just in terms of generating the business case, would certainly encourage those that haven't gone through this process yet is to do that deeply and frequently. Getting executive sponsorship up front is invaluable. And if those executive sponsors and leaders out there in the business can see the value of the SRM program, then they're going to be amazing advocates for the program and also for the team that's supporting it. If it doesn't spread far and wide, they're very valuable in assisting teams in spreading it far and wide, but if you do get it wrong, they also can play a big role in its ultimate fate as well. Resources, that's pretty important as well, just in terms of setting up a business case. We had a dedicated program manager. We also had 6 dedicated procurement professionals involved in that, in that program, along with I think it was approximately 6 to 8 internal executives as part of a broader steering committee. So it's important that you've got that support behind the scenes as well. It's also important from our perspective now that we have set up the program is to have dedicated SRM professionals running the program, not say procurement professionals that have carriage of SRM, also category management, also running contract negotiations as well. Clearly defined roles and responsibilities. I touched on that earlier with respect to the delineation between SRM and contract management. That was really important to get that right. Communication of change is critical, so we spent quite a bit of time just showcasing what the program was all about, identifying the roles and responsibilities as well. Technology, that's a non-negotiable from our perspective. That's a really important enabler for extracting value out of the relationship with your supplier, communicating with them effectively, and just at a really basic level as well, it's a fantastic central repository too for storing documents. Purpose and intent, I think I touched on that a couple of times, be really clear on the delineation between SRM and CMF. And then lastly, as with any program that you run, it's really important to reflect and refine and to have that continuous improvement mindset as well. That's it from me. So I think we're opening up to questions now.
Oh yeah, go for it. I think we'll probably have one, and yeah, please go for it.
I guess when you're doing things research before you
Yeah, the contract management framework is owned and governed by procurement as well, so we had that sort of luxury. I think we've had a number of goes at it over the year because it hasn't necessarily had the right cut through. Originally, it was quite a detailed document, but we've been able to simplify that and make it easier for business-led teams out there to follow. It is quite different in terms of what it does focus on. It does provide, quite strong and detailed guidance as to how to run a sourcing event, for example, how to manage risk upfront when you're onboarding a supplier, but also what you need to have in place once the supplier is onboarded with respect to contract management plans, the areas that you should be covering. But they're more sort of operational in nature, managing commercial issues and disputes, as opposed to what the SRM program is, which is more strategic in nature around trying to align strategies between organisations to manage risk at a much higher level, look at opportunities for innovation, and certainly around sustainability and ESG. So we had the advantage of having oversight of two of them, and we made sure that they were definitely quite different.
I think there was one more question, Mark.
I'm interested to know whether or not you had the executive buy-in at the beginning of this process. Did have to do a bit of lobbying. I'd be interested to understand what key points that you had most.
Yeah, we did have some executives that were familiar with the concept. Others weren't, so we did have to certainly promote it at a high level to start with. I think me personally and the procurement team as a whole, we had an executive that was fantastic in helping us sort of showcase the benefits and promote it internally very early on. I think the State of Flux team were critical in enabling us to do that, giving us the sort of the building blocks and the foundation to be able to talk to that. I think some executives did have a misconception early on with respect to what it was. They did think it was more sort of operational and sort of commercial issue and dispute management to start with, but we did have to educate them and pull them out of the weeds, so to speak, and make it really clear to them that the responsibility for running QBRs, for example, and monthly business reviews, looking at contractual KPI performance and the like, that was still the responsibility of the business and those executives. On the other hand, the SRM was something certainly more at a strategic level. And as I touched on in the presentation, we did have some executives running their own programs, interacting with suppliers. Others were doing it across the organisation, and what we found out was that they were talking to the same suppliers. Mixed messages. we're certainly missing opportunities in that case to align strategy. We were losing a little bit of commercial leverage as well. You had some executives and groups providing too much information, not knowing that there was for example, a contract negotiation happening on the other side as well. So bringing it all together and having that enterprise-wide lens was an important realisation for a number of executives as we moved through the process. Yeah.
With your technology stack,
Yep.
did you find it was important?
For us, yes, so that they could talk to each other. We could extract details around contract expiries, the values, the stakeholders associated with that. That's directly linked into this particular platform, yes.
Yep. So we do have an opportunity to ask more questions. It was definitely a very fascinating presentation. I'm sure we've got a few more questions to go, and we will have opportunity for that and for Q&A as well. But if you can join me in thanking Mark for his very insightful presentation. Okay. So thanks, Mark. It was very insightful, and I think gave us some really good tips for organisations trying to implement SRM. And it sounds like the consulting company you employed was really amazing in helping you with your support as well. Now we've got time for just a quick break. So we'll be looking to for a 25-minute break. So there will be refreshments that will be served outside for people online. So we're coming back at 10:02 for the next part of our session. Thank you, everyone. Excellent. Welcome back. I hope you've had some time to have a break and then ready for our next session. I hope you had some food and some drinks as well. So for our next keynote speaker, we've got Justin Laughlin-Hyde from Asia Pacific KY3P S&P Global Market Intelligence. He's a commercial director there. Before his role here, he spent some time overseas responding for building and leading global third-party risk management functions by both Wise and Investec Group, covering bank, wealth, and asset management solutions. So Justin is going to talk us through some nth-party risk monitoring through data and automation. If you can join me in welcoming Justin for his speech. Thank you, Justin.
What's up? It's a little bit tight up here if you're not as slim as you are, Frank. So remember that for next time. So yeah, I'm Justin. I work for S&P Global. And I think like many of you, you didn't aspire to be in risk or supply management. You've probably landed in it by default or by accident. It wasn't on my HSC careers list. All I wanted to be was a pastry chef. So I've done the furthest thing I could from it and ended up in risk. But it's one of those interesting things where I moved into financial services because I wanted to break from shift work and hospitality. Took a job actually with ComInsure in the call center in the old days. That then turned into operations, which then turned into vendor management. And then, you know, we've all evolved in this industry into risk management or supplier. And it then brings the debate around, and I've heard lots of different terms mentioned today, is are we procurement? Are we supply risk? Are we third-party management? Like who are we? And we wear these like multi-hats all the time. And I think for most of us, it's a combination of all of it. As you kind of take your one or the other, you've then got first line defense hats in financial services, then you put second line hats on, you're kind of these multi people. So it's a fun industry to be in, a little bit far from baking cakes. I have twin girls who turned 5 last week. So we have a party on the weekend. I'm going to put my pastry chef skills to use and try and make a bluey cake. I'm not going to show you the pictures because it's going to be an absolute disaster. But we're going to talk about nth party monitoring and sort of who nth parties are. And to kind of start, I wanted to tell you a bit about who we are. So we're a very proud sponsor and partner of State of Flux, have been for a while, and they're a really valuable organisation for us to work with. So who is KY3P? It's not a relation to C3PO, as my family joke about all the time. What we are is an integrated solution around third-party management, all the way from end to end. So from onboarding and oversight to work out where's their risk, to then due diligence and monitoring, checking how things are going, assessment services. So it's a service where instead of having to do all the due diligence yourself, buy something off the shelf. Makes it a little bit easier than having to conduct it and feel like you're admin and chasing. Last week or 2 weeks ago, we had a forum in Singapore where we had some banks, some third parties, and the regulator to have a tripartite discussion. And one of the third parties we had was AWS, Amazon Web Services. I'm sure many of you are familiar with them as an organization. I'm sure some of you are familiar with them from being somewhat challenging in terms of due diligence and responses. So when we got to the panel discussion, the plan was that we asked the same questions to the banks and said, like, how do you develop your risk modeling, your governance, and how does it work? And then the plan was to actually ask the third parties the same around how do you develop your responses to all this. But instead, I was a little bit cheeky and I said to AWS, you're the worst for everyone to deal with in terms of due diligence responses. So I'm going to give you the opportunity to actually talk to everyone and clear the air about why you're notoriously the worst. And they did a good job. So I'm a little less frustrated with them now. But it was really interesting to hear from a third party's perspective around how they respond and why, and the challenges that they face. And it was interesting to hear that there's now there's a real education piece that needs to flow both ways, not only from the organisations looking at risk assessments and conducting, but from the suppliers as well around how are they building responses and how can they educate back around what they're doing. So that's a bit about assessment. So I think it's definitely a way forward in terms of mindsets and thinking and how do we do things differently and as a group. I mean, for a lot of us, we have one regulation that we need to adhere to and we interpret it 1,000 ways. It's about how do we start to streamline. So no surprise, and we're all here because of the relationships we have with third parties. We do this for cost, skill, scale, demand, lots of different reasons we use them. A lot of the time, and coming from roles where I generally report to COOs or CFOs, a lot of this is about operational and cost efficiency. So how do we make the most of these relationships and what does it look like? But the thing that I've seen more and more over the last few years is our third parties have third parties. And what are they doing? And do we even know who they are? Not to be the scaremonger in the room, but we need to start to look at who are they using. We've got operational resilience, we've got all these resiliency things that we need to do, business impact analysis and business continuity, and we've always looked at third parties, what happens when that goes down, but there's a bigger chain that we actually need to start looking at. So then it begs the question going, who's responsible for the fourth party? You know, we all do our due diligence and check that on our third parties and go, are they financially sound? Do they have SOC reports? We go tick, tick, tick. But who's then responsible for who they're using? And what's our then responsibility off the back of that? So I have this argument with our in-house legal teams all the time around, is contractual liability a really strong risk mitigation strategy, or is it where you go around the monopoly board and get your get out of jail free card and go, cool, not my problem? The issue is, I shouldn't say the issue, the challenge is how do you then marry up everyone's liability and make sure it matches all the way down the chain? Now, not the most fun way to spend an afternoon is mapping liability clauses out, but it's a tough thing to do. So I thought the best way to explain this to you is probably the best and worst situation that I've been in terms of nth parties. So at one of the companies that I worked at very recently, I started, they had no third-party management or risk program at all. It was a little bit messy, fintech, everyone very smart, but shorts and t-shirt, no risk. So I got this contract that said, look, we've decided that we're going to centralize payroll instead of having, payroll in every country manage it. It's all about cost efficiency. This is so great. We've shaved all this money off, all done. Here's a signed contract. Just make sure it's fine from a risk point. So like, okay. So we did the whole risk assessment model on it, looked at personal information that was going out, interconnection of systems, reliance on people and everything. And so the inherent risk came up as high. I mean, it was payroll, but there's still that risk level that, we've got staff information and all and breaches. Now, I then spoke to the provider and said, look, we need to, under the regulations, being a global company, we had to adhere to 39 regulations. So I said, look, we need to understand who your subcontractors are or your fourth parties and who are they. And from a regulatory point, all you have to do is list them at this stage. So you have to just acknowledge who they are. And then I asked a question around what due diligence do you do? Like, how do you make sure that this is working? Because people rely, like our staff rely on their pay and we can't have an issue, or more to the point, the last thing we want is a breach where the CEO's salary gets leaked out or everyone starts to see what the execs are earning, especially come share time when no one wants to know how much the CEO shares were worth that pay because you just sit there and go, oh, my shares weren't worth that much. So we started asking the questions and they were becoming a bit cagey from a response perspective. And I was looking at this going, okay, we can either keep this as sort of an important risk, but if I'm not comfortable from a bigger resilience point, that what happens if they go down? How do I make sure that, 5,000 people get paid kind of like that? And it's not an easy thing to do. So it's, look, you're going to need to send me your web, like show me like what your process and how all this works is. We then got into the liability argument, going, you don't need to see it because if something goes wrong, the contractor's got a liability clause, you'll be protected. And I was like, does it really help when I've got people whose mortgages have bounced and there's a problem? So we went back and forth, and this got heated and heated, and I said, okay, look, either we call this and you give me a list, or what we're going to have to do is I'm going to have to move you to critical. Because if I can't see enough of a resilience plan that I can show to our board and to our staff, I have to flag this as critical. And with that comes an entire new level of due diligence that you're going to have to go through. So they objected, and we went back and forth, and in the end, they just went, fine, we'll show this to you, but it's confidential. I was like, okay, fine. They sent me this slide, and it basically was, in total, there were close to 30 fourth parties that they had, or in this web. But when you actually then sort of stopped and mapped this out, the UK and EU function had then a seventh party relationship. So the payroll people, like we outsourced to them, they then gave it to another group who did one function, who then went on and on and on and on and on. So it scared the out of me to no end. It's like, we have a real problem here, is what do we do? And how do we manage this? And it was a very, very tough call. We went to risk committees, because I'd never seen anything that far before in my life. I said fourth, maybe fifth, but seventh was just ludicrous. And the payroll company were very happy that this was just fine. It was business as usual. Nothing would go wrong. So I took this to operational risk and to board, and kept flagging that we have a problem. We really need to look at how we manage this, which sparked, one of the debates that I'm sure many of your organizations go through is, what's driving us? Is it risk or is it commerciality? Who holds the stick, and which way is everyone moving? So there was lots of discussions. The CEO called me a control freak, because I wanted to sort of find ways of checking that everyone was right. I mean, this is the joys of working for a startup and a fintech, is that it's go, 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 go. And then you've got people like me sort of, lassoing everyone, going, oh God, you need to slow down. You're just moving too fast. So we went back and forth, and it was a really rough time that no one knew how to manage. So what we ended up doing was using ongoing monitoring and automation flows to give us a level of comfort around what all of these providers were doing. So when you looked at the whole chain, like no individual provider was critical or important, but they all played a part in sort of the bigger picture here. So what I ended up doing was I was architect on a system that we implemented there, and so I designed the flow and how it worked. And for me, one of the key things from a risk mitigation strategy is around ongoing monitoring and the information that you get in every day to see what is your ecosystem of vendors actually doing, or how are they performing. So we put all of them into there to just get enough basic information to go, are they financially stable? Are there any cyber breaches or cyber attacks that they've had? And from a media monitoring point, is there anything that we should be aware of that could put us somehow in sort of disrepute? And that's how we did it. Now, for me, the ongoing monitoring piece is really where I've always seen value in risk strategies, is that upfront, when you do your due diligence, you always get a snapshot in time. It goes, financials look good today, no cyber attacks today, everything looks sort of tick, tick, tick. But it's once that contract's signed and you move into day-to-day stuff, a lot of us are focusing on service levels. Are the SLAs being met? Are we getting everything? Are our clients happy? How is this all working? Which is pretty normal because that's what we're all worried about at the end of the day is how are our customers being looked after? But for me, it was that I love that piece. I mean, this is how sad my life is sometimes, but I love that piece every morning of getting an ongoing monitoring email that goes, oh, someone's in the press because they've done something wrong. Oh, what did they do? You have a little snoop and go, okay, right, doesn't affect us today. But the way we really used this, and it really hit home to the organization quite hard, was when Silicon Valley Bank went under. So 2 days before, we got a financial notification that their score had dropped by like 2 scores. And because we'd implemented like a robust risk system, that everything was sort of in there, like they were flagged as a critical provider to us, we saw a drop of 2 scores. It allowed us to then go, right, they safeguard customers' funds. So big problem. If their scores are going down, what's next? Right, so we had that. We then had a news alert coming through about some instability in the organization. So it allowed us to actually go fast, let's move some cash. All right, so we took 90% of it out of SVB and moved it to another organization. Next morning, they went down. So it was one of those ones where you sort of wake up in the morning and go, oh, thank God. So it's kind of one of those things that's really hit home for me around, yeah, upfront due diligence is great, but how do you manage this ongoing? Like, how do you then look at your ecosystem of vendors and go, you've got 4th, 5th, 6th, hopefully you never get to 7th, like I had to, because it's incredibly stressful. But how do you look at this? So think about really understanding your ecosystem. Like, ask people who they use and why. And think about the monitoring bit as a key thing, because that's what's going to give you the information that not only can empower you to make fast decisions that protect your organization or your customers, but will actually allow you to really focus on risk mitigation, not admin. That's me. Thank you.
Thanks, Justin. Were there any questions from the crowd for Justin?
I've got it easily.
Susan.
Oh, no.
It's got a...
Have it implemented what, sorry? So there's providers that you can use to, the crux of it is you need to have a platform that can bring in all your feeds. So there's lots of people out there that can sort of deliver like financial feeds, everything all the way through. The key that you need, or that I always think you need, is a platform where you've got your inherent risks and everything coming in to be able to do it. It looks at your questionnaires, it looks at all your due diligence, and then can feed in. So what you get is a holistic view of what that relationship looks like, sort of upfront, and then for the entirety of the time you use them. There's lots of ways that you can do it.
One more, yep.
No, we wanted to. We started with criticals we looked at, and we did stressed and non-stressed, but to do the entire chain would have taken years to do. We just didn't have the resourcing to do it. So it's risk-based. But what we focused on always is where is there risk, and with interruption, what could cause the most damage? So it's that combination of the risk of the third party and the nature of the services to go, where do you test and why? And some of them you can get away with a desktop test. But yep, this all looks good in theory, but there are some that you really, really need to stress test. And that's when you'll find out, are your continuity plans as good as what they read? They're fun. Very fun.
Excellent. Thank
Cool.
you.
Thank you.
Join me in thanking Justin for the trust. Thank you. Thanks, Justin. Thank you, Justin. There was some really great insights when it comes to looking at risk further down the supply chain. So thank you. For our next speaker, we've got Andrew, who's head of sales at head of ANZ sales at Enable. Andrew currently leads Enable operation in ANZ, working with leaders across various industries to improve financial operation and risk management through the adoption of strategic rebate management. So, Andy, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Beautiful. Thanks very much. Easy. All right. Good morning, everyone. Obviously, thanks very much, Alan, Frank, and Jen, for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Enable today. We're a rebate management solution, and we'll get into that in a minute. Bit of context. So when I joined the workforce, it was post-GFC, and a lot of organisations were looking for ways to differentiate. And the research and consulting firm that I worked for at the time coined it the age of the customer. And Alan, to your point earlier around journey mapping, that was the primary exercise we were doing with a lot of the, at the time for me, the government agencies, so state, federal, and local. I'll share a DIA story in NZ with you in a minute, but also with the big four banks, insurers, and the supers here, on how to differentiate that customer experience, or in this case now as well, employee experience. To Mark's point at Transurban, that voice of supplier, we had the voice of the customer then. It still applies today, and that was nearly 15 years ago. And to Nika's point, and Danielle, obviously nice to see you as well. Nice to see you both. From an automation and RPA or robotic process automation perspective, those initiatives were prominent then as well, but in a different context, and I'll get to that in a minute. And the story I wanted to share originally, to Alan's point around, I was working with the DIA, Department of Internal Affairs in New Zealand, around how the agencies would actually engage with citizens and suppliers better. And a lot of that work was around how do you drive a better supplier relationship across your ecosystem, where the CIOs, the CPOs, the chief architects truly understood what that web of suppliers, services, and experiences that the agency back in 2012 wanted to drive. Go to the big four, worked with a big organization in Sydney that you all know about, and it was around their mobile app, right? The NetBank app back then. And a lot of the initiatives there were around customer-centric initiatives to drive, obviously, one, voice of the customer, the employee journey mapping on how to drive those experiences, and mapping out the ecosystem to drive that truly omni-channel experience where it was mobile first. Now, if you think about all that in the modern landscape now, that extended enterprise is even more crucial or important and prevalent when trying to integrate that supply chain and all those parts of that broader network, right? And I guess the presentation today will delve around, how do you become that customer of choice and building a bank of good faith, goodwill, and trust with your actual suppliers. And obviously in return for that, it's a mutually beneficial strategy and experience for everyone, right? And in challenging times like today, similar to post-GFC, where it was actually on the other end, it was going up, right? It was improving. This is more important for your suppliers and the employee experience that you're trying to drive internally. I think a show of hands here, how many of you prioritize your tier one suppliers? Every day, every morning, you think about your tier ones. It's actually what I found at Enable in the last year. It's that middle to tail of suppliers where you don't give them as much love and attention and support, and understanding their outcomes and priorities is where we believe is the narrative around improving that experience, right? And having a collaborative tool like Enable and educating your suppliers, your ecosystem on how to unlock those efficiencies and that first-hand account of, say, for example, a rebate earnings perspective, and having that year-on-year, year-round experience where they're actually proactively working with you and you're not just chasing them, So that's a bit of context. I'll just go on to next slide. So we talked about that tier one. A lot of you raised your hands around that. And our friends at Deloitte recently had a survey that found chief procurement officers or leaders like yourselves are all spending 74% of their time on those very transactional or operational activities. It also showed, though, that the highest performers had those at about 63%, which to me says the most about how can technology enable those experiences. McKinsey, on the other hand, also then highlighted that 60% of the transactional procurement tasks can actually be automated. So Nika, to your point, how can you actually have that pinnacle or that optimized internal experience where 40% is the manual time that you should be sort of aiming for? And because we often gravitate towards those tier one of our suppliers, there's a significant impact around how do you manage that extended enterprise, right? So ignoring the tail actually has, or middle to tail, actually has a compounding risk as the relationship with your suppliers goes on, given that those suppliers actually collectively have a significant impact on your business and hold substantial value. So if you look at that middle to tail of your suppliers, that relationship you have with those actually reflect how you work with the holistic view or holistic way that you approach supplier management. So showcasing yourself as that customer of choice, where you actually truly value all the different parts or links in that supply chain, whether it's big or small, you need to prioritize those middle to tail across your whole ecosystem. As State of Flux have noted in their report, having your suppliers wanting to work with you should be the aim, right? The benefits that you'll get is around that early access to innovation, being involved early, co-creating, right? And then improving those incentives or rebates, or overall being that team regarded as the one we want to work with, or the A team. By efficiently actually managing the tail, it allows you to actually focus more, not just with your tier ones in a strategic way, but actually further strengthening that broader extended enterprise. Let's go back one, sorry. So Mark Gillum, who's our subject matter expert in the UK, I actually caught up with him at 7 a.m. this morning. He was up late. And so Grafton was an organization he was part of, and they're actually a building supplies company. And you can see there they had over 12,000 suppliers, 4,000 of those were active. And all their rebate income was actually coming out of the top 100, so 92%. Across all of those, they're all in spreadsheets, right? The most sophisticated system, the system we battle against the most. Some have wonderful, spreadsheets. And when they joined, they started leveraging Enable and adopted us, it actually created some pretty eye-opening results, right? Oops, sorry. And one of them was around finding about 1.2 million in rebate income or earnings that were previously missed, right? By unlocking that spend or finding that rebate earnings, actually allowed them to free up resources to actually focus on those strategic supplier relationships and actually trying to maximize that middle to tail and the value within those contracts. Okay, so the automation. So Nika, to your point, and Mark around that voice of the supplier. How do you have that view that yes, you'll still spend time and effort with your tier ones, but actually all the income or support or initiatives and outcomes that you're missing with your middle to tail, how do you find that financial, operational, or risk benefits to actually drive a better employee experience internally, but also a supplier experience too? And in terms of benefits, right? I think all of us can agree that we're trying to foster a very transparent, single source of truth, and proactive way of working, right? The transparency actually fosters that trust. Right? We talked about at the start around that customer-centric or customer age of the customer initiatives, right? Back then. Now I think it's all about how do you have that customer trust or supplier trust initiatives? Being proactive in the challenges that they're facing, trying to find opportunities to collaborate better, but actually having that really proactive approach in long-term or more fruitful relationships by not having reactive ways of working. I think talk is cheap. Words and actions are very different, and I think transparency in times like these really relate to how you actually operate, right? How do you leverage technology to actually enable those experiences, and how do you then change the way you approach your understanding of your suppliers' outcomes and initiatives as a key role? Ultimately, the end goal is having those very mutually beneficial relationships, right? A win-win scenario for both yourselves and your supplier in that ecosystem. I guess that ongoing collaboration will allow you to have those win-win results, but also it's better aligned to your goals. Having that strategic view or holistic view and not having those unexpected year-end rush or year-end orders where it actually strains both sides' resources, those are actually avoided and minimized. And the ultimate is trying to create that mutually beneficial partnership, but having someone like Enable, I've seen in the last year actually supports that. So in the last year, we've been educating our customers on what automation means from a rebate management perspective, right? And that stems from even to the point of actually understanding who are your suppliers, in their entirety as a single repository. That's one. Being able to identify who you should prioritize across that supply list, right? We all know that, again, that timeless effort around trying to make sure we're sticking to our tier ones, but actually how do you unlock those opportunities with your middle to tail and your tier twos and threes? Data and insights has been the #1 request from all of our customers in the last year, right? The advanced reporting or internal reporting that I've noticed from our clients, where it's coming out of Power BI or a data visualization tool, is, for example, the executives in retail are asking for insights around their integrated business planning initiatives. How do we prioritize suppliers who are going to be able to align to the outcomes we want to drive the next 2 or 3 years? And how do we have at the C level a view of actually who would those suppliers be, and how can they actually be strategically supported? And on the other side is, how does your supplier actually get the same view as what you do, right? I talked about the single source of truth at the beginning. How do you give them that access to the information that you have? And from a rebate perspective, understanding the tiers or the incentives that you've set, and there's no discrepancy in what they see and what you see, right? You're not chasing them for an invoice or a claim. Actually, they already know proactively what they're in store for. That phone call isn't going to be, negative or destructive. Actually, it's proactive and healthy. And just going into, and just trying to summarize, sort of from Alan's perspective at the start, how do we become a customer of choice, right? And not just with words, but actually investing the time into the relationships that you have with your suppliers. Efficient management, time management from a financial, operational, and risk perspective actually creates that opportunity for you and your team. Finally, that transparency, that proactivity, actually then gives your teams the ability to have those healthy and fruitful long-term relationships, where it's crucial that nurturing of those long-term outcomes as well. I guess overall for us at Enable, we're trying to foster those trusted trading relationships across that whole ecosystem. And I guess I would challenge all of you to understand between now and obviously that next age of the supplier or age of the customer, what do those initiatives and priorities mean to you? And particularly around that employee experience, because we believe that's where a lot of the effort is going to be valuable for everyone. That was it from me. Any questions?
So there was one that came through. I think you mentioned automation and how that's going to change, how that's changing, quite a fast changing environment. With AI coming into play as well, how do you see that rebate management tech, how do you see that evolving over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I think obviously we consume a lot of purchase data, sales data, transaction data, and a lot of it's around again predicting or seeing the trends, whether it's seasonality or future proofing your strategies in which suppliers are going to give you the best return and best support, and actually aligning to those outcomes. So for us, the AI piece, I think, is being able to understand in advance, again proactively, who you should support, who you should prioritize, but also finding the right partners and suppliers around you in that ecosystem to drive the business outcomes and initiatives.
Excellent. Cool. Thank you. Anything else? You can join me in thanking Andy. Very good, sir. Thanks very much. You've actually done my job as well. You've moved me on to the next session. So for our final session, we've got a panel discussion, Q&A. So if I can ask the Nika, Mark, Alan, team to join me on stage, that'll be great. Your mic. So we've had some really good presentations and some really good discussions that's come up today. And then what we wanted to do was just bring some of those discussions to life. Tim, we haven't introduced you. Did you want to maybe just give a quick introduction of yourself to the crowd?
Yeah, sure. So I work for ANZ. I always think it's important to contextualise perhaps where you sit in the organisation and what you do. So I sit out in the business, so in an organisation called Customer Service Operations. I look after about 100 suppliers, post-contract award management. We've looked at a lot of tiers and triangles today. So we've got probably 1 or 2 suppliers in that top triangle. About 100 of the suppliers are in that second triangle, and we don't look after any suppliers in that third triangle. For context, ANZ's probably got about 8 suppliers in the top triangle, probably around 300 in the second, and then 3,000 in the tail spend of the suppliers there. Got a team of 20. We look after post-contract award management. For context, ANZ is a very risk-based organisation. Banks are all about risk, and so it's about managing risk. So my team evolved from managing contract compliance, and we're kind of moving up the chain into more of the supplier relationship management space.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. So I've just got a couple of questions to kick us off. Nika, we haven't heard from you for a while, so we might start off with you first. From your point of view, what are some of the key factors that's driving organisations to position themselves or their supply chain as part of the extended enterprise? You've mentioned that with your role, it only came about 2 years ago. So what drove that for Telstra?
Yeah, absolutely. Coming from the resale type of business. So remember when I explained, we've got a multi-dimensional supplier relationships. We can, buy from, sell to, sell with. It gets really, really complicated. Which your traditional scenarios and the way that, Mark, you described as an example, implementing that in organisations are fantastic. However, what we found is you need an extension to that when you're dealing in that multi-dimensional scenarios. So what's driven us to come up with, say, my role and create my team within the enterprise is, one of them is the value to customer. What are we actually packaging and what are we actually selling to the customer? How can we get better at it? How can we get more competitive in it as well? So some of the cost implications as well and the cost pressures. So let's be realistic. The margins are getting slimmer, on both sides, on the supplier side, on our side as well. In your traditional discussions of which we were very good at was our T22. If you remember Telstra's T22, it was all about cost out. So I think we squeezed in our suppliers enough. So going to drop your price point, those conversations are no longer working. So, and that's what we come to a realization. We can't keep going down that path. So we need to start talking a bit more collaboration, creating that value to the customer and creating that win-win scenarios. So that's definitely what drove that for Telstra. And for us to be able to do that and to be able to enable our procurement team to support us better, we needed to create that closer correlation with our sales team. So and that's where my role comes in. Excellent.
Thanks, Nika. That's really, really great insights. Mark, what about you from a Transurban perspective? What drove that? What drove those changes?
Yeah, probably all centred around just becoming a customer of choice, I think, for us. So as I was touching on earlier, we build and operate toll roads. Some of those projects are in the vicinity of $5 billion plus. We want to make sure that we've got access to scarce resources from those suppliers. So whether that be staff to actually work on the roads or technology as well. So that was one main reason. The other one too is risk management. So we have a lot of technology on our roads that enable us to draw revenue. If we have a situation where perhaps there's a cybersecurity incident with one of our suppliers that may impact the technology that provide to us, we're not able to bill our customers, and obviously that's going to impact our the revenue that we're drawing in and the impact on our share price, etc. So they're probably two main reasons as well. And then lastly, just and it's definitely prevalent, I know, in Telstra, but meeting customer expectations as well. So if you're in an environment where you're outsourcing a lot of things, working very closely with your supplier to draw those insights and those perspectives on what matters to your customers, what's working, what's not working, it's crucial that you've got that open line of communication and that transparency.
Excellent. Thanks, Mark. Tim, what about from an ANZ, from a banking perspective? What were the drivers for that?
So helps if I use them. So the drivers for ANZ, so as a number of people alluded to today, banks are risk-based organisations. So it's almost always been around, how are we managing compliance with the regulators. And so, we've got a banking license, so we have to get a license to operate as a bank. And there's a whole bunch of prudential regulations around things that you need to comply with to have that banking license, which are pretty important to being a bank and pretty important to endearing trust in the community, that you're going to look after their money. So it comes down to risk-based arguments in the bank. And if ever you want to get something done in the bank, then you typically lead with a with a risk argument.
Excellent. Thank you, Tim. Alan, I might draw you in on this next one. So, so we've heard some of the key factors, some of the key drivers around this theme now. A lot of organizations, they're quite set and they're quite mature in the way they work. How do we change organizations' mindsets? You think more with what we're talking about today, that extended enterprise mindset?
Yeah, never waste a good crisis, right? Which is always, it's always a good point. Again, from the research and also from clients we work with, generally the catalyst is around 3 areas. It's around value or money, savings driven. It's around risk, or it's around access to innovation, and those 3 things. But what we're finding increasingly kind of necessary is getting it to the board and getting it certainly to execs to kind of wake them up. And I think, let's face it, COVID and the knock-on effects have helped a little bit from that, but we need to make kind of hay while the sun shines a wee bit in terms of positioning that. We always find that voice of the supplier, measuring customer of choice part, a really good input, because 9 times out of 10, when you go to the business and say, are you managing your supplier? Hi, I'm from head office. Are you managing your suppliers correctly? Their first answer will be, excuse my language, piss off, my supplier, go away, how can you help? I go to barbecues at their place, we've got a great relationship. So we need to actually come to them with facts and data around why they need to change. And for me, that kind of customer choice piece is really valuable, because they often don't even think about it. The other bit is, what are they currently doing versus what's good practice? Because sometimes they are doing a good job. No one goes to work to do a bad job. They're doing a good job, but they don't know what great looks like. So sometimes our role in procurement is actually just showing them what the art of the possible is and where they are versus where they could be. So those 2 data points around customer of choice through that voice of the supplier study and what good looks like really help with the business case internally. So for me, it starts with that. And we know from the research that if you don't do that, pretty much your program isn't going to stick. It may work while you're there and while you're driving it, but the minute that you leave and you stop pushing it, it hasn't stuck in the organization.
Thanks, Alan. Nika, what about you? What were the things that had to be done, or you have mentioned it is a relatively new function. So how do you go about changing that mindset about how to evolve the way that Telstra works?
Absolutely. Good news is Telstra, and especially in the enterprise, we know that the suppliers are critical to us, because without suppliers, we're not able to package the solutions and solve customer problems. So that's not really the question mark for us. The question mark, however, is how do we manage our suppliers holistically and more effectively? So like many complicated and big organizations, we've got our top suppliers, when we've got this massive middle tier and even longer tail end of those suppliers. So again, how do we start effectively manage that? And what become really, really important for us is actually to have a good look at ourselves inside first. And that's part of my role is, how do we start negotiating with our suppliers and actually even engage in the conversations, first of all, at the more holistic level? Because one of the feedback that we have been receiving from the suppliers for years, to be honest, that we are incredibly difficult to deal with, and trying to work out who to go to in a business can be really tricky, because we've got a multitude of the functions, and our suppliers can quite often sit across all of those functions as well, and all those different sort of engagements and the capacity as well. So the very big takeaway, and this is what we're currently trying to drive with my team, is actually uniting us internally as a business, so we can get all our insights. On some parts of the business, we're buying the services from those suppliers for our internal consumption. Guess what's going to be important to them is a cost. So in the other ones, in the like enterprise, we don't buy services for consumption necessarily, but we certainly drive in the growth agenda. So it's really important for us to have that strategic alignment. So once you start putting all of that together, the conversations with our suppliers become easier. And then, of course, there is a compliance bit. We can't ignore that. So being a listed company, we've got a whole array of the compliance as well. And it's, in fact, is one of the things that we're now using that as a bit of a stick as well, because we've tried the nice way, we've tried, not so nice way. Now we're trying a really mean way. You have to come and talk to us because we have to address those compliance issues. And that's how we're sort of trying to drive the traffic across my group to then, in turn, to enable our procurement to do the wonderful job for us.
Excellent. Thanks, Nika. Speaking of compliance, Tim, we know that there's some new rules that's just come about, CPS 230. How do you change the mindset within ANZ? I mean, maybe you can tell us a little bit about CPS 230, for people who are not familiar with that in the crowd, and then how you're going about changing that mindset within the bank.
Yeah, so CPS 230, another APRA prudential standard that we need to comply with for our banking licence. It's about operational resilience. So the regulator wants to know that if something happens, if there's any bumps like that we've had recently, that the bank is still going to be able to operate. There was previously two other standards that talked about that, so 231 and 232, and they were separated. But the regulator felt that the bank wasn't, or banking in particular, in general, wasn't across the whole spectrum of all the risks that were associated with all their critical services. So this new standard's coming in about 2 years' time. If we go back to, so I started at ANZ 4 years ago, so it was 3 months before COVID started, and then COVID was coming, and so we could see it was coming. And 19th of March, I remember the day very, very vividly. We all got sent home. So leading up to that day, we'd been reading the news alerts, and we knew that something was coming. And so we could see that business continuity management was going to be key to this little 12-week exercise that I thought it was going to be of COVID. And so the bank had really good foundations in place for how to do business continuity management. So you go and look at your service. What's the service criticality? If it's got a high service criticality, then you put some business continuity management clauses in the contract. If it's really high, then you put some beefier contract clauses in the contract. And then something happens, somebody just looks after and makes sure that all that's happening. And so 3 months into the role, 100 suppliers, we've got these foundations, but is the frame up on the house yet? So do we actually have the business continuity plans? Do we have the business continuity tests? Have they passed them? Have they all, what do they all look like? And so we were lucky enough that we had some BCM experts in our team, and so we started asking our suppliers, what does it look like for you? But then, so we got through that period. We got all the business continuity plans and tests and disaster recoveries and contingency plans, all those raft of documents that everybody's quite familiar with. But what we found through that is that our suppliers understood their business continuity better than what we would ever understand their business continuity. So that was a tick for the suppliers. We could trust the suppliers. And so, we had great relationships through that period. So we were having suppliers coming to us saying, we've got a card processing facility. We've had in the early days, we've had a case, we've had to shut down, or we've had to do, midnight shifts, or we're delivering cash around the network. Cash was being used less, but, we can now only have one person in a car. So, what does that look like from a safety perspective of the supplier? And we had to sign off on a whole bunch of different things. In the end, the suppliers got it, and they were excellent. And we couldn't fault any of our suppliers for their business continuity plans. But the learning, or what the learning from the end of it was, is that we needed to educate our business and our business stakeholders. So I sit in the business, and got 30 different business units who use the services of these suppliers. So we needed to educate the business around You do a service criticality. Remember, you do your service criticality. There's a contract clause, and the suppliers are complying with it. And this is the architecture. And so we had to save the suppliers from those 30 different business units for those enterprise type suppliers, each reaching out to the supplier and being bombarded with questions from those suppliers. So CPS 230 is about ops resilience. Ops resilience is, there's lots of other factors to it, but that business continuity management is a good example.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Tim. Just a bit of a change of pace now. I want to delve into that next level of detail. Mark, so we've seen from Alan's, when Alan presented the results, that governance, there's been a bit of a drop-off in governance this year. And you've just fresh come off, implementing an SRM governance framework. And with today, there's a lot of discussion around risk, ESG, supply chain disruption. So, there's a lot of emerging topics or areas that's coming up. So when you're setting up that framework, how do you set it up so that it addresses some of these emerging factors?
It probably all starts with a willingness from both parties to be transparent and collaborative to actually get into the meat of those particular topics. But before you actually get into those topics of supply disruption and ESG, I think you've got to make sure that you've got the right tools and intel behind the scenes. So we heard from Justin earlier from S&P that if you've got those monitoring and alert tools that arms you with enough information and intel to at least investigate it, have that open conversation with the supplier, I think that's a really important starting point. I think also that you've got experts within the organisation, whether it be in the ESG field or in the risk management front as well, that can help sort of push those conversations along, that can pick up those initiatives post a governance session and drive that to a resolution. And then I think just more generally, just executive support and care. That's really critical, I think, to make sure it's on the agenda and it's discussed in detail.
Excellent. Yeah, so some really great tips there. Thanks, Mark. Alan, you've set up a lot of governance framework around the world over the years. What are some of your tips, and what do you see? When you see organisations that has done it well, what have they done?
I think the common challenge that everyone has is that we write it in procurement speak, and it needs to be written for the business. I think that's the most common mistake, is people write it and the business doesn't understand actually what we need them to do or what we're trying to drive. So for me, that's kind of number one. I come back to segmentation treatment strategies around that. If I take kind of Nika's challenge, what that does is she needs to have, I know we've discussed this, so world-class segmentation and treatment strategies, because you've got a complex relationship with multi-dimensional kind of suppliers where you sell to them, you compete with them, you partner with them, so they could have kind of 4 dimensions. And Telstra is not alone in that. A lot of your businesses, the banks all have customer relationships with suppliers. A lot of your businesses, you have both customer and supplier relationships with these. So your segmentation becomes critical, as does your treatment strategy around that segment. So for me, getting those right and then getting the governance model written in a simplistic, business understood language, not with procurement. We're great with acronyms and things like that. So we're guilty of it. SRM, RFP. I know we've discussed a lot of the kind of 3-letter acronyms. Getting it into that kind of common language that your stakeholders understand, for me, is critical as well. So, yeah, I mean, don't write War and Peace. It's just it'll gather dust. It's got to be actionable.
So thanks, Alan. Nika, this next one I've got is for you. It is quite a dynamic environment at the moment, and obviously our relationship with other organisations that might evolve over time. So you might go from just being a customer to also being a supplier, vice versa. how, your that holistic enterprise view, how do you transition your organization from being being a supplier of choice to also being a customer of choice? How do you navigate that change within your organization?
Can I start with the word collaboration? So that plays a huge part. We spoke about people. People need to talk to each other to be able to get the insights and the information. Collaboration is a really, really big one. And I guess I never really appreciated the effectiveness of the collaboration living in the shared services side, where you deal with sort of one-dimensional, I guess. You heard me talk about outsourcing component, but when you move into multi-dimensional environment, so collaboration becomes key. Because those suppliers, like you said, we've got three-way relationships, which could be quite awkward because tomorrow we could be competing in the market against them as well. And it's actually having those open conversations internally, but then also externally with our suppliers as well. Going, this is a reality, but also recognizing that, how do we partner better and how do we win in this together as well? Because the reality is they all run businesses as well. They understand that the services we're going to buy for consumption, of course, we want better deals, we want better pricing. But they also understand, that we are playing in the same market as well. So when you're going out and reaching out to those customers, that's a very different dimension as well. And just being super clear about it. Another one I'll finish off with agreements. So they are really powerful, and that's where your power of your collective enterprise comes in. We've got at Telstra, we still got quite a number of agreements structured separately for the same supplier, which could be a bit beneficial, but it does not help to create that collaborative environment as well, because every time you have in the discussions or negotiating, it's that one-dimensional sort of, I want cost cut. You don't have this all-encompassing relationship. And that's what now becoming really, really important, is that collaboration and all-encompassing relationships.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Nika. It's very insightful. So that's all my questions done. We do have a few from online, but before we get to that, I'd love to hear if there's anyone else in the audience that wants to, any questions directed towards any of the discussion panel members. If you can state your name and organisation, yes, please, Alan.
Through the agenda that you're having with your strategic suppliers. Just interested in getting some insights around how you're ensuring that you're getting
Yeah, good question. Thank you. I think for us, it's all in the planning. So we spend quite a lot of time, developing those value drivers up front with internal stakeholders to start with. We then bring in the suppliers to get some perspectives and thoughts on what is mattering to them. We spent a lot of time early up front as well, just trying to articulate and make sure all our suppliers understood what the program was about. It wasn't to discuss commercial issues or disputes or operational matters. It was strategic in nature, and we had some examples to showcase with them on that front. So that's really important in the planning for us. Very tight agenda in terms of what we're discussing and the time we've got allocated. But post the actual governance sessions as well, we've got a couple of SRM managers whose main role is outside of those governance sessions, is to really drive those initiatives, drive the issues that are coming out of it with the business stakeholders and with the suppliers outside of that. So quite structured and methodical for the moment, but we're early days, but it's certainly we're on track. We're getting really positive feedback and that sort of warm, fuzzy feeling from those conversations that we are having with our suppliers. And yeah, we've been able to really solve some interesting problems so far and get some access to new technology that we weren't aware of previously. So, yeah.
Thanks, Mark. Sumi?
Sumi Sabanagam from the NAB. So Tim, we have the same challenges as you guys in terms of CPS 230 and what that will bring. Focusing more on the supply management part of the standard, where are your key sort of opportunities in terms of gaps, do you think, and that pathway to get to 1st of July 2025?
So I think that is a very banking specific question. So I think the key challenge is understanding the standard and, understanding the standard. What is a material service provider? So, the standard says that there's a material service provider and you're providing critical services, I think it is. So it's, what is the definition of those two? And I think what banks need to guard against, and especially risk-averse organisations such as banks, is that the definition of a material service provider is this big when really it's only this big, and the definition of a critical service is this big when it's this big. So it's making sure that we're doing just enough to meet the standard and we don't take on too much, because my fear is that we're going to do 10 times the amount of governance that we need, that we're already doing right now, when the governance that at least we've probably got in place is good enough for probably what the standard's looking for. So that's my take on it. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yeah, no, for us it's, at this stage we're seeing that potentially we're going to see the doubling of our material suppliers based on critical services. So then for us it's challenging the way we monitor our suppliers. So we're heavily reliant on humans to do assurance activities. How do we change that? How do we get technology to enable a different way of monitoring?
Yeah, so one of the things that ANZ's rolling out at the moment is if you look at risk, there's lots of different models. So you identify it, you assess it, then you manage it. Through our identify and assess phase, across all the different domains, we found out that we had something like 2,000 questions that we're asking our suppliers. The State of Flux survey might have been 40 minutes, but 2,000 questions for a supplier is a lot, and it's not required. And so as a first pass, ANZ has gone down and trimmed that. I think we're down to 200 questions and we're looking to perhaps get it down to 100 questions. So then to make sure that, when we're dealing with suppliers, it's easy, and it's easy for the suppliers to answer. And, there's a bit of commonality in, the questions that we're asking, and making sure that, there's a bit of common sense to it as well. There's a reason for it being asked, not just because it's a nice to know.
Yeah, it's actually very similar to Telstra. So different type of regulations, but exactly the same challenge. So we've actually have trimmed down our questionnaire as well. So exactly the same.
Excellent. One more, I think.
G'day, Sean Anderson from Telstra. More questions for Alan. I was very interested in some of the survey results, specifically around people, because over the last few years we've seen a great transition of procurement resources across multiple organisations in Australia. Are you seeing any of your customers or organisations that you've dealt with who are doing really well with attracting new talent or graduates to their organisations and their procurement functions?
I've seen, it's an excellent question, and it's interesting actually, because I think it was pre-GFC. Anyway, I'm showing my age. It was a while ago. We had come up with a kind of shared graduate program between us, BP, HSBC, and I can't remember the fourth. And the concept was to pass graduates around for 6 months each, and at the end of the 2 years, we'd all have to fight for them for it. And we did get it going, but GFC kind of put the kibosh on it. But I'm not seeing enough of that attraction kind of and playing to kind of what graduates want, which is generally at the beginning of their career quite a bit of variety. So yeah, I think I'm not really answering your question, because I haven't really seen some kind of interesting programs or enough of them. And I think we as an industry could do way better. I know certainly if I look across the Tasman, New Zealand's got a huge glut of procurement. They can't get enough procurement people. There's a real problem, and the ones that they have got need upskilling. So as a profession, we've got issues. We've got the same challenge, for example, in Houston. the oil and gas guys can't get enough procurement people. So as a skill set, we're in high demand, but we're just not bringing enough through the universities. So maybe as a kind of challenge to all of you, go and speak at local unis and attract. I know Frank lectures at Melbourne, but the more we can get out there and inspire graduates to come into the profession, I think the better, because I don't think we collectively are doing enough on that front.
Excellent. That's actually a really nice response to, looking to the future to wrap up this discussion panel. If you can join me in thanking the discussion panel for the time. We can go back to Steve. Thank you. And Alan, I think you'll wrap up for us.
Well, it's just, I know it's always a long time to be sitting listening to people, so thank you very much for everyone's time and attention. And a huge thank you to sponsors, Enable, S&P Global, and of course Telstra for this amazing venue yet again. So thanks Nika and Neil for that, and of course my speakers and team. Hopefully, if you've done the survey, one of the thank yous we give you for doing the survey is a free benchmark, which is basically your results of the survey versus what we see as best practice. And we have a team set up predominantly in London that crunches through those numbers and gives you insights from your results and top tips around what you could do to improve. It's free. So if you've taken the time to do the survey, please make sure that you reach out, or if you haven't been contacted by my team, please reach out and do that and schedule it. If you didn't do the survey, no problem. You can still do it. The data doesn't go into the book, of course, anymore, but we can still do your benchmark. So if you are, again, reach out, let us know that you're doing it, and we'll schedule a time for the benchmark. But you may as well. It's a free data point to show where you are. And I know a lot of programs just use it as one of their KPIs each year around how their program's going. So please do it. It's free. I'm going to leave you with a few things to get going. A nice bright white screen to wake everyone up. I think hopefully today we've seen a few tips and techniques to engage your executive. We've cheekily said, get your business case in front of your CEO now, but certainly, what we've seen from this year's results is, if you think your program's good, it's probably not as good as you used to think it was. So even if you've got a good program, go, take it to the next level, get investment from your executive team to take it to the next level. Or if you're just starting on the journey, now's the time to get the business case in. With all the disruptions, all the challenges around the globe, we need to leverage these relationships, and we need to improve how we do it. We've talked about SRM technology. We'd love to show you what we're doing on SRM and how we're kind of evolving our SRM technology. So if that's on your radar, let us know, and we'll schedule a demo. Even if it's just to show you what the art of the possible is, let us know about that. Training is a huge area. We have a full curriculum on SRM training, and we're even with S&P Global and Enable developing out that training to include things like third-party risk management and rebate management, all of which are incredibly important on your overall holistic management of your suppliers. So there's a whole curriculum there. Again, take advantage of it. And we do that both publicly, so you can send one person, or you can do in-house. So it's quite easy. And then the final piece is we've got the report ready for you. We didn't give it to you earlier so that you did listen to what we were saying up the front rather than reading the book, but it is there. Please grab a copy. Where are they, Denise? Just on the table outside? Okay, so they're all there. But again, we'll be here for a bit. Talk to us, talk to Frank, Denise, Patrice. We're here. We'd love to speak to you about your SRM programs. But thank you. Hugely appreciated.